You'd imagine after making a 45-minute character analysis on Raven, I wouldn't have anything else left to say about her for some time. But as you can tell from this video, that is quite frankly untrue, because there is something I wanted to add and talk about. Whereas that video wound up being a much more detailed character study, this video is subject to change where I share my ideas and thoughts about the direction of her character. More specifically, how I think if the show wants to properly do her character right in the future. How they should go about it. If you haven't watched my other video I made about her, I please encourage you to. I think it's very well done and will give you great insight about her and how she was written, whether you currently like her or not. But you see, that video came due to a care I have about who she is. Arguably the most dangerous feeling to have in regards to this show, as I can count on one hand the amount of characters who have been done proper justice and have stayed consistent. Caring about the quality of this show's characters and storyline is often what leads to its most disappointing moments. The more invested people are, the bigger the negative reaction will be. It's happened before in the negative sense, and all I can hope is that it doesn't happen again. Or when it does happen, it at least happens to the characters I don't care about. And needless to say, since Raven in recent history has become one of my favorite characters, I fear the resolution for her storyline. Unlike other characters who weren't exactly left on a cliffhanger that required a resolution, Raven definitely was. Her storyline was never actually resolved. There was no sort of conclusion, and so many viewers who have taken an interest in her are left pondering when and how she's going to return and what's going to happen when she does. The general consensus about what needs to happen is universally agreed upon. Somehow, some way, the relationship between her and Yang needs to be mended. Raven needs to be able to somehow express that she cares, and Yang needs to lose her animosity and negative outlook towards her. The goal is simple, and it's that exact reason I fear the most. You see, RWBY has a habit of biting at the first piece of bait that crosses their paths. Traditionally, instead of delving deeper into issues that are much more complex to properly navigate through, often what is settled for is the simple and safe solution. It's much blander and deprives the show of having proper depth that can really make viewers adore a franchise. Take for example, the loss of Yang's arm. Getting her arm chopped off was a big deal. It traumatized her and sent her into a state of depression. Kind of. What wound up happening was, instead of the solution being her capacity to overcome her disability through perseverance both physically and mentally, the solution was just to give her a new arm, which solved almost all of her problems that came along with it. In fact, her arm wound up making her stronger than she was before, and she actually wound up becoming much more reckless because of it. Overcoming something psychological like this undeniably takes much longer to deal with and is no small feat to try and tackle. But when they don't want to properly take the time to deal with these things, they instead have to find an alternative solution. The story is just shoving the characters to a destination. You've probably heard the phrase, "It's not about the destination, it's about the journey." But these creative decisions value the destination and try to push the characters along as fast as possible, not taking any pit stops along the way. There's this need to get the characters to the kingdom so the plot can continue. Yang's arm was a moderate example, something that did take away from what could have been much more complex and added to her, but it didn't resort to the extreme. An extreme example of the show fully pulling the plug on a concept they didn't know or want to deal with was Adam. He had reached a point into the story where he wasn't relevant to the destination they wanted to go. His story had yet to be given a resolution or in reality expanded upon in any way. Adam, in theory, represented a lot of the complexities of the racism subplot. Or at least he should have. They instead tried to perform a narrative surgery and separate the themes of his characters and make him just a person. And once they thought they did a good enough job at reducing him to just an individual who represented nothing, they killed him off. They figured it was a good enough resolution to his character. He had been driven to the point where the only solution was death. And he's not the only one who suffered the "he's no longer relevant, so let's just kill him off" decision. Roman was also just killed off because they had no more need for him. Their small crime storyline was done, and they were just looking to move on and go to another kingdom. So he was killed and they just moved on. And it's that exact pattern and line of thinking which has made me fear for the resolution of Raven. As I mentioned earlier, most people wish to see a mending relationship between mother and daughter, a redemption, so to speak. But due to the past examples, I can't help but fear the writers will believe this comes through her death, believing the only way for Raven to show Yang that she cares is by sacrificing her own life for her daughters. But you see, this decision would represent the continuous problem of simple and extreme solutions in this show, stripping all gravitas away from what killing a character should represent. The audience shouldn't begin to like a character who's not an antagonist, at least, via their death. RWBY as a series likes to believe the stakes are super high. Characters can die, like the early seasons of Game of Thrones. You never know when it'll happen or why, but always be on your guard. But it's really not that. And it's given itself a delusion of what certain characters' deaths had meant. It's not through the killing of a character your story becomes good, but the meaning behind it and the build-up to it. If you want a good example, take Pyrrha. She was a character created to die. From the moment of introduction, she was the perfect warrior. Untouchable, unbeatable, her only flaw was that she really wasn't very good at romance. She was designed to be a representation of what could happen via Volume 3. Her death showed us what type of warrior could fall in the face of evil. She wasn't there to carry Jean until he became a true warrior, she was there to set him off on his journey. Her death was the fire and fuel which pushed our characters to fight on. Her death had real meaning, and she was killed at her best. Not physically, but in regards to the audience. The audience cared about who she was, which made her death so saddening. People didn't begin to like Pyrrha when she died. They loved her before then, when we got to know her, all of the time we had spent with her. And it's when a series takes the proper time to form a bond to a character and the audience which will yield its most effective results. People like Roman and Adam were kinda just killed without meaning or purpose. This is the reason I fear the next time we see Raven, it will result in her death via sacrifice for Yang. To much of the general audience, it will be seen as good enough. They'll get the point that she developed enough to care, but in reality it'll be a bland resolution in the long run. It'll feel like the only point of her character was disservice pushing Yang without being a character herself. So I wanted to propose alternative solutions which will service more than just Yang and even Raven. In fact, I believe for Raven to gain a true redemption, a requirement is the involvement of Tai Yang. As a kicking off point before the gears start turning again, the show has to recognize the failings of its past. Addressing the core reason for why Raven left Yang is vital to a proper redemption before anything else happens to her. Raven's story isn't solely the ability to show that she cares and has emotions. She needs a proper story to go along with it, a story that is tied to her individually, not one with Team Stark, not one with only Crow, but a story that belongs to her and is personal. Based on how things were left off, I genuinely don't believe that her and Yang can simply sit down and talk about it. Especially having this done in a natural way. Things between mother and daughter were left off on a bad note. It feels too far out there for this to happen, which is why I said I think Tai has to be a key player in this entire thing. Also, by involving him in this story, it gives the opportunity to develop him as well. We're no longer keeping it isolated to Raven and Yang, but their entire family, as the whole thing involves him as well. I believe Tai has to be the one who initially addresses Yang's lack of understanding and attitude, because Yang shouldn't have a positive outlook towards her mother in any way. Things did not leave off on a good note. And I think it would be the perfect opportunity for Tai to go into angry and disappointed dad mode. Yang can continue to be as hard-headed as she usually is, speaking only poorly of her mother to the point where Tai stands up to defend her, and be the one to ask if Yang even knows why she left them. Tai should hate seeing Yang despise her mother. She was a woman he once loved. She and her daughter are blood. The last thing I'm sure he wants to see is Raven dying with her daughter hating her. A chord which doesn't precisely line up but can easily be something that reminds him of Summer. One of those, we had an argument and then she died, leaving off on a bad note scenario. I genuinely believe Tai is the only one who can force Yang to listen. But if the show wants to take things a bit further, and it should, it would also prove the perfect opportunity for Team RWBY to play a role as well and help push Yang to want to get to know her mother. Each of the girls have their own individual experiences with their own mothers, that of which they can use to help persuade Yang. Also, the characters don't talk about their parents enough, and moms are cool. Weiss relates greatly to Yang. Weiss too didn't exactly grow up with a mother. She was there, but she wasn't exactly there. But despite that, the two seem to be getting on better terms in recent time. And Weiss can use this to relate her life to Yang's. Blake can speak of her experiences of how great her mother is. I'd imagine Kali is a quintessential mom where she can talk to her whenever and she's always there and supportive. Things like that. She can give the perspective of what she's done for her life. And RWBY can finally have a heart-to-heart with her sister. And probably say something inspirational per usual, but along the lines of how she never got a chance to know her mother. But if she had the opportunity, she would before it was too late, despite whatever scenario. Doing this, they're collectively all looking out for one of their own, helping her in avenues she doesn't realize she'd need. This is what being a team should be about. Not saving the world from evil through grand epic fights, but these smaller interpersonal moments that really push them to be better, show that they care for each other in these more muted moments. They should be a catapult which pushes Yang to see things differently and pursue the truth. There are many avenues the story can take if it really wants to try. From here, things can go in many directions. Many viewers believe the idea that Tai had actually cheated on Raven with Summer, which is what drove her away. This would be a twist, but unlike the show itself, I don't believe to build a character up, you have to tear others down. If Tai had cheated with Summer, it undeniably would taint both Tai and Summer just to make Raven a very sympathetic character. But the show shouldn't have to do that. Instead, I believe it can still play on many of the themes of each character while not antagonizing anyone here. A key point should remain Raven's inability to be a traditional mother. Summer was the one who was baking cookies, kind-hearted, and the super mom, which is why Raven should be almost a caricature of the exact opposite. Many fans joke around with how RWBY Chibi handles the characters better than the actual show, but in reality it's true. Because RWBY Chibi strips all the characters down to their most basic form and then over-exaggerates them to an obscure extreme. Tai may be a dad in the show, but he's not exactly as ridiculous of a boomer as he is in RWBY Chibi. But in reality, he does exert this sort of energy. And while Raven hasn't exactly been in RWBY Chibi, it's not unwise to think along those lines on how she would act in it. And that would be a mother who doesn't know how to be a mother. And doing this would cause an inherent fear within her, continuing to play along the themes the core show has already given her. Being torn between two separate worlds should cause her to question where she wants her life to be. Undeniably, Tai doesn't fit into the bandit camp, nor do I think you would ever contemplate living there. So the burden would fall on Raven's shoulders to go back to the life she's familiar with, or take a step into the unknown, into a life she's never understood. And perhaps the family life was one Raven wasn't confident enough in believing she could do right, thus being a major contribution in her deciding not to stick around. But this would also be a great time to give Tai some flaws as well. Many viewers have taken a note of his extremely passive role in everything that's going on. He sometimes leaves his house, but for the most part, he doesn't seem to take too much action himself. He's not an active player in anything that really happens. It'd be a great opportunity to put a bit of the burden of Raven leaving on his shoulders too, as it'd be semi-unexpected. Raven, being too scared and hesitant to properly raise a child, chooses to retreat to her past, and Tai's inability to reassure her and make her confident that they together could do it results in him essentially just letting her walk away. He'd feel semi-responsible for Yang's lack of a mother. Thus, it doesn't pin the blame on only one of the parents, as they both wound up failing. But then again, there's also the idea that many fans of Ravens also currently believe. There's also the chance that her decision to leave Yang with Tai was a conscious one, not motivated by not wanting the child, but leaving the child with a loving father in a nice environment, believing this is the life she deserves, but not one that she can give her and be a part of at the same time. It's not that she's given up on Yang, but she's given up on herself without even allowing herself the opportunity to try. In a way, it could be sadly poetic if Raven does know how to parent but never did because she was scared of failing. But personally, I believe it may be the better route to have her work in the more unorthodox ways that mean well and show that she's trying. It gives her a bit more personality and makes her stand out than if she was just perfect at all the things she was fearful about. Someone who's fearful about fighting shouldn't be the perfect fighter. Fear comes from an inherent uncertainty or lack of experience, or sometimes a traumatizing experience. Raven, I don't think, was ever raising kids before, unless she was babying Crow when they were younger, but even then it was probably more tough love she lived by. Personally, I think it fit her better still maintaining her bad attitude and not being good at the whole mother thing. But at the same time, trying. It gives her her own personality and definitely makes her stand out compared to everyone else. In fact, if you look at each of the main characters' moms, Raven fits perfectly into an unclaimed spot, as there are two main aspects that really define each of them. And that's their capacity at being a mom and their ability to fight. Because this is RWBY and that's relevant. Summer was the gold standard. She was the supermom who did almost everything right and was a good fighter. Kali is a good mom, loving, supportive, and kind, but she doesn't really know how to fight. Hitting someone with a tea tray is different. Willow is the opposite of Summer. She's a bad mother and she cannot fight. The only combination we're missing here is a bad mom, but a good fighter. Any other combination and she'll be exactly like one of the other moms. And that's why Raven fits perfectly into this role. Weirdly enough, all of the moms have a better and more uniform cohesion than their children. Give me this show, please. And that's not even mentioning the whole spring maiden thing as well. It's another popular idea and wouldn't be hard to weave in part of the reason she left was because of her powers. These are the things the series must do before anything else. She's still a maiden, so she's still relevant, but focus should remain on making her a character first. Regardless of how they wish to give her a resolution, they must first make her more than a premise. If her storyline does end in death and sacrifice akin to Pyrrha, you must understand why Pyrrha's death was so effective. Killing a character isn't a bad decision unless you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. You must make us care about these characters, and the first step in doing that is making them characters. You can make flawed individuals without tearing them and others down to do it. The show must first learn how to take its time with its characters, because if not, they're going to die meaningless deaths just to move on to the next location. If the show really wants to treat its characters right, Raven is the perfect opportunity to show that they want to give more depth and have us truly understand who these people are. It's not the show's job to tell us who we should and shouldn't like. It's their job to make as best of characters as possible, and then have the audience form their own views. But until that happens, I'll be keeping my eyes on Raven Branwen.